I still remember right before God of War 2018 came out when I was asking myself if this series would be ruined by the changes that they made to the gameplay. Going from the wide-angle view of battles to a more up-close and behind-the-shoulder view just felt odd at first. How would the arcade-like combat translate into a game with more intimate camera angles? I thought it would end up feeling too much like a Last of Us or Uncharted kind of game rather than a blood and rage-fueled action game. Something that catered more to the cinematics and story rather than the fast-paced combat. And while the cinematics were turned up, the change in the combat ended up being such a smart move. I was a fool to think that Santa Monica could possibly do wrong. God of War PS4 quickly became one of my favorites of all time, and it went to show how changing the gameplay can breathe new life into the entire franchise. The combat was fresh, the exploration felt rewarding, and the story was so much more relatable than ever before. But fast forward 4 years, and now we're back in the Nine Realms to see the continuation of Kratos' journey in the land of the Norse gods. Just within the first hour of playing, you'll be thrown straight back into the story, and from there on out, you will not want to pull yourself away. If you have a job, you might have to quit that because you have gods to slay and a teenage son to be frustrated with. I thought it was going to be a struggle topping the amazing story in God of War 2018, but damn, did they do this sequel justice. When we left off from the previous game, we had the image of Thor about to lay down the might of Asgard on Kratos, which leads us into meeting one of the major antagonists in Ragnarok. It's no surprise that he's a powerhouse of a character that gives one of the best first boss fights I've ever experienced.
Oh no. I say what?
What? Seeing people's reactions to this was so satisfying, and a part of me wishes that I would have recorded my own, because this is the kind of stuff I love seeing from this series. Throughout this campaign, the main theme continues from the previous game. Family is the core focus of the plot as we see quite a few kind of struggles regarding people's loved ones. We see stories between parents and their children, we see brothers and sisters reunite, and we even see the birth of all new relationships as well. Every story ties into this theme as we all experience the love, grief, and acceptance that each tale puts on display. Not only with the obvious story of Kratos becoming closer with Atreus as he becomes a man of his own, but also with stories surrounding Thor, Odin, Faye, and even Brock and Sindri. And I never would have thought that these two would have such a compelling story here, but my goodness, did they bring some heat with the character development. Some of these side stories ended up being more interesting than the main plot with Kratos and Atreus. Each character was written with care, and the cast did a great job portraying each emotion. Ragnarok works well as a game that covers even more of the Norse mythology while making each plotline relatable. It does stumble over some of its concepts a bit later in parts of the game, but we can discuss that when we start talking about spoilers. Anyway, it goes without saying that this is clearly one of the better depictions of Norse gods in recent memory. And I guess it's not too much of a contest when the only main competition is Thor from the MCU.
Flip too hard, damn it!
Oh, how the mighty have fallen. But Thor in particular is such a well-written character in God of War Ragnarok. You might think of him as being the main antagonist because of course he's meant to be Kratos' rival, but in actuality his character arc turned out to be so much more complex than that. For example, Thanos from the MCU is a villain who many people love because he was given a more detailed background. In the comics, this dude is a mad titan who lives for death, pain, and destruction. He has that Black Air Force energy down to a T. But in the MCU, they turned him into someone that was more goal-oriented and killed to bring his version of balance to the universe. Because hey, if you agree with Thanos in the comics, you're a genocidal maniac, but if you agree with Thanos in the MCU, hey, I don't blame you. So in God of War, Thor could have easily become a Norse version of who Kratos used to be. Fueled only by the rage of his lost loved ones and out simply to get revenge on those who wronged him. Now yeah, he still has his own issues to sort through, but it is clear that they wanted to create a villain with purpose. I loved seeing his own family problems and how it develops into a larger narrative. Having him become a character to compare and contrast against Kratos helps the two of these characters and their families develop immensely. And I'll admit, the one character I didn't vibe with as much was Atreus. Throughout the game, his motivations felt more like he was instigating. Like, so much of what happens just wouldn't even be a thing without Atreus wanting to keep pushing the envelope. Whether he's just being curious or just straight up stupid, he's the driving force of so many events that happen here. I guess it makes sense as a coming of age story. Because hey, as a kid, I can't say that I didn't get myself into some nonsense just for the hell of it. Now maybe not on the same level of almost destroying the world, but hey, kids will be kids. Meanwhile, Kratos is just like,
chill out, my boy. I'm not trained to start a war with nuggers.
And yes, he can say the N-word. You can thank Christopher Judge for that one. But the story felt more focused on Atreus moving deeper into being his own person without his father always being there to guide him. Whether you like playing as him or not is a totally different thing, but in general, I did like that this journey wasn't always focused on the father-son dynamic. You could even compare this with The Last of Us 2, seeing how the young characters take the main stage and flesh out their own journeys, even if their decisions aren't always the ones that we agree with. Anyway, let's talk about the gameplay of Ragnarok. First off, the progression system here feels extremely satisfying with all the options we have available. There's skill trees for Kratos and Atreus, both being able to learn new techniques for each weapon and complete challenges to unlock even more. So if you're like me and prefer the Blades of Chaos over using the axe, then you're able to feed all of your skill points into just that. Or even put it into making your Spartan Rage really powerful early on in the game. But that's only scratching the surface. There's still the weapon attachments and runes that we know from the previous game, each one having its own stat boost to help make your perfect build. Not to mention the armor that you can wear and even the variety of shields that you can choose from. The shield in particular was a game changer for combat since it opened up more possibilities for the kinds of things you can do just by blocking and parrying attacks. The Stonewall shield you get early on in the game was my best friend through most of my journey. It fits my playstyle more since it's not as picky for whether you do or don't hit your parries correctly. But with the many varieties, I can see how gameplay could be so much different for everyone else just because of a small change like this. There's a decent weapon variety, and one that you unlock later on in the story just feels so right. It opens up more long-range options for Kratos and also helps to solve puzzles in many of the past levels. Specifically for Atreus, I have to admit that he didn't feel as good to me, but I can see why so many others disagree with that. I've seen many people who prefer to use him more than Kratos, mainly because of his ranged options. He does have some up-close attacks with his bow, but you're much better off being strategic. Chaining together the rune abilities on his arrows makes for some satisfying combos and works in tandem with your partners. And again, Kratos does get his own ranged weapon later into the story, but Atreus with his bow and arrow can end up being a nice change of pace. What I really liked was his summoning abilities, like the one where you can send an entire pack of wolves at your enemies. Moves like that can turn the tide of battle, especially when you're being overrun. I do wish we had more variety in the bows you can use since there's only 3. But they do offer a different playstyle for each one, so it's not too bad. The most interesting part of Ragnarok's gameplay is how much more diversity it includes compared to every other God of War game. The previous game introduced us to mechanics where Kratos will be able to use Atreus for his arrow abilities while using them to combo into his own attacks. What Ragnarok does even better is that it expands this companion system to a wider variety of characters. Each time feels refreshing as you not only get to have multiple ways to fight your enemies, but it also helps move the dialogue along more smoothly during each chapter. Personally, I prefer games that naturally make the dialogue a part of the gameplay while adding in jokes and witty banter. It doesn't feel anything like those games with dialogue wheels and tons of choices.
Well, I'm not gonna ask her. Besides, they were your arrows.
You're absolutely right, which is exactly why I'm recommending we don't do this.
Instead, it keeps that fast pace of combat and adventure without skipping a beat on each character's development. I won't go too heavy into detail on this since some of these companions could be major plot spoilers, but it's nice seeing characters that otherwise wouldn't do much start to become a more important part of how you fight through each level. And it would be nice if we could swap between these pairings at will in the New Game Plus, but that's just wishful thinking. By the end, every part of the gameplay felt like it was designed perfectly to give the right amount of challenge while also spicing up your options. Not for one moment did I feel I could play this on autopilot without putting some extra strategy into the mix, which makes this one of the most well-designed games I've played in all of 2022. But now I'd like to jump into some of the deeper discussion within Ragnarok. Obviously, if you want to experience the epic journey of Ragnarok for yourself and don't want any major spoilers, skip ahead to the timestamp on screen now. I feel like one major part nearing the end was racking my mind, so I have to talk about it real quick. So if you're ready for spoilers, let's get into it. Throughout the entire game, we have this looming idea that Kratos is clearly going to die. Even after finishing the previous game, we get a glimpse into his death and expect this to be the last game with him as the lead. Well, that didn't turn out quite how we expected. Kratos is still alive and well, even after his son was seemingly ready to take on that mantle. We see that clear enough since now he's on his own adventure with his boo thing at his side. Ragnarok was a great transition away from the story of Kratos, since so much of the game centered around him staying away from war and just wanting peace for himself. With how much it focused on Atreus, I thought it would have been a good way to build his character up to be the main protagonist. With the plot centering on his connection with the Asgardians, I got a similar vibe to when Kratos first took his place as the God of War, becoming one of these gods and stepping into their ranks even if only for a short time. Then at the end, chaos and destruction as the hierarchy is taken down from the inside out. Obviously, Atreus wasn't about to go on the same kind of rampage and kill all the Norse gods, but that clearly wouldn't be fitting of the kind of trickster that Loki is in mythology anyways. By the end of Ragnarok, I felt that Atreus accomplished something similar to what Kratos did in God of War 3, but in his own way. Into the final battles against Odin, this would have been the best place to allow Kratos to pass the torch to Atreus. And I wouldn't have been the happiest person seeing Kratos kick the bucket, of course, but I can't imagine the next step this series will take. Hopefully, Atreus will be able to take his step into the spotlight even if it takes a larger time skip before that happens. It would even be nice to see this series cross over into other realms and have these characters interact with even more kinds of gods. People are saying it's possible to get into Chinese or even Egyptian mythology. And if done well, this series could do a great job of digging into much more than we ever thought possible. Hell, some even say that Kratos should take on Jesus next. But hey, whatever that next step may be, Ragnarok truly lives up to the idea that Kratos has always been a god killer and will continue to be one even when he does want to settle down for good. And it's crazy to think that death may not even be an escape for him. But all tragedies aside, let's wrap this up. God of War Ragnarok is a phenomenal game that deserves every bit of attention it's getting. The story flows seamlessly through the adventure parts of each level, the combat is challenging yet rewarding, plus the characters here are some of the best written that I've seen in a while. If you own a PS4 or PS5 and you haven't played this yet, I recommend that you hop on it immediately. Let me know what you thought of God of War Ragnarok in the comments. Was this all that you wanted and more? Was there too much story for you and not enough action? I'd love to hear what you think. Subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you all next time.